So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled 20th Century Fiction, where we're looking at James Joyce's novel Ulysses. So in this particular section we talk about the very interesting mixture of flippancy and profundity in this novel, especially when it comes to machines. So we'll look at the relationship between the metaphysical understanding of mortality, immortality, and a very flippant material understanding of the same issues at hand. And the section that we look at today is obviously, this is set in a graveyard. This is a funeral ceremony which is taking place where Leopold Bloom is attending, and then he's having a chain of thoughts in his mind. Thoughts range from mortality to machines to flippancy to different kinds of sentiments, which are very interestingly mingling with each other and very curious combinations. So as I mentioned already in one of my previous lectures about Ulysses, there is a lot of stream of consciousness in this novel, but then at the same time it's not entirely about a profound epiphany, it's not entirely about mystic epiphany. The mysticism and the profundity of these emotional experiences are always mediated through very flippant material markers. And the material markers are very vulgar in quality, they're very earthly in quality, they're very immediate and local in quality. And the vulgarity, the immediate quality, the automatism of these markers, it doesn't really belie the metaphysical profundity of thoughts, but actually accentuates it and at the same time complicates it. So how do we human beings think in terms of our negotiation with machines? How can machines help us not to bring us down, not to reduce us into different forms, but also to accentuate us as human beings. So this whole engagement with machines becomes a very important issue in modernism in particular. Right? If you take a look at, we have already talked about Eliot's Wasteland and also some of his early poetry. We've seen already how machines become a very recursive feature in those kinds of poems, where the entire idea about consciousness, memory, thought processes, they become mediated and marked by machines. And the marking of machines become very, very important. And in this section we'll find out exactly how Joyce does in this novel. So we have sentiments about mortality, immortality, the fact that everyone's going to die, imminent death in Dublin, and then all these sort of mix together and they inform different kinds of other sentiments through certain machinic markers. The gramophone being a very interesting metaphor of machines over here. Okay, so this is being gazed at by Leopold Bloom. This should be on the screen. A bird sat tamely perched on a poplar branch, like stuffed, like the wedding present Alderman Hooper gave us, who, not a budge out of him, knows there are no catapults to let fly at him, dead animals even sadder, silly-milly burying the little dead bird in the kitchen matchbox, a daisy chain and bits of broken chainies on the grave. The Sacred Heart, that is, showing it, heart on the sleeve, ought to be sideways, and red it should be painted like a real heart. Ireland was dedicated to it, or whatever that. Seems anything but please. Why this infliction? Would birds come back and then peck like the boy with a basket of fruit? But he said no, because they ought to have been afraid of the boy. Apollo that was. How many? For these here once walked around Dublin, faithful departed. As you are now, so once were we. Right? So this almost becomes a swan stable, and he sees a little bird on the branch. And he knows the bird is very certain of his life at the moment, because there's no catapults thrown at him or it, and the references of dead birds, dead animals around as well, and it suddenly becomes very spectral in qualities. It's almost like dead people, dead animals, dead organisms having voices of their own and speaking with the living people at this point in time. So it becomes a swan stable-like sequence with the dead speaking with the non-dead. Besides, how could you remember everybody? Eyes, walk, voice. Well, the voice, yes, gramophone, and this becomes an interesting bit where machines come in as a marker of memory, right? And memory becomes mediated through machines, so the materialization of machines. So machines become the material markers, material reservoirs, material containers of memory, as it were. Yeah, well, the voice, yes, gramophone. Have a gramophone on every grave and keep it in the house. After dinner on a Sunday, put on poor old great-grandfather. Crab, hello, 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 I'm awfully glad. Croc, awfully glad to see you again. Hello, hello, awful shush. Remind you of the voice like the photograph reminds you of the face. Otherwise, you cannot remember the face after 15 years, say. For instance, some fellow that died when I was in Wisdom Hellies. Now, so the gramophone and the photograph over here, they emerge as interesting preservers of memory. So these become acts of self-preservation to a certain extent. So again, this is something which we saw in Eliot's early poetry as well, especially in The Wasteland, where the gramophone had appeared as a marker of automatism, as a marker of numbness, so to say. If you remember that scene where the typist she puts a near record on a gramophone where an automatic hand moves towards the gramophone and a half thought passes through our brains. That obviously became a metaphor of numbness, a metaphor of stillness, which was part of the dehumanization that Wasteland was depicting and dramatizing. Now, obviously, over here, it is more carnivalesque in quality. By carnivalesque, I mean it's more playful in quality. So, Bloom over here is having an epiphany about mortality and immortality, and he realizes that one way of preserving memory, one way of preserving the voice is from the gramophone, just like the photograph is a preserver of images, preserver of faces. So that becomes an interesting marker of preservation, self-preservation, etc. So again, what we have here is a very interesting entanglement, as it were, between something material, something earthly, something flippant, and then something metaphysical, such as memory. And if you remember, this can be connected to some of the early discussions we had, especially in the last lecture, where the whole idea of metempsychosis, where and the Bloom Leopold Bloom and Molly Bloom are talking about the entire transmigration of the soul, how the soul actually passes from one body to another body, and so it never really dies, how that was immediately interrupted, and how that entire sequence cut into the overcooked kidney, or the kidney was being transformed into something overcooked. And we saw how the very spiritual metaphysical understanding of migration was very quickly aligned with a very interesting culinary migration that was taking place with a burnt kidney, which is almost inedible in quality by the time Bloom managed to rescue it from the stove. Okay. He looked down intently into a stone crypt. Some animal, wait, there he goes. An obese grey cat toddled along the side of the crypt, moving the pebbles. An old stager, great-grandfather. He knows the ropes. The grey alive crushed itself in under the plinth, wriggled itself in under it. Good hiding place for treasure. Who lives here? Who lives here? I laid the remains of Robert Emery. Robert Emmet was buried here by torchlight, wasn't he? Making his round. So he takes a look at all the graveyards, the graves of different people over here. Tail gone now. So again, look at the way in which this gaze, which is about dead people, about mortality, about deadness, is being mediated through this very quickly moving mouse. And this scene reminds me especially of the scene in Hamlet, the grave-digging scene in Hamlet, where Hamlet, the great procrastinating prince, the philosopher prince, he's ruminating about life, about mortality, about immortality, about language, etc., in a very pseudo-comical way, in a very darkly comic way. And that dark comic quality of the graveyard scene in Hamlet is something which is here as well, as Leopold Bloom takes a look around the graves and finds out different connections, and is getting interrupted by mice and thoughts about gramophone. Okay, tail gone now. So again, the movement of the mouse in this particular case is very, very important. It's like a shifting signifier of meaning. The tail is gone. One of those chaps who would make short work of a fellow, pick the bones clean no matter who it was, ordinary meat for them. A corpse's meat gone bad. So again, this very vulgar and corporeal understanding of the human dead body is interesting over here, because on the one hand we have this entire discussion about metempsychosis, about the transmigration of souls. Our souls shift from one position to another position, and on the other hand we have a description of a corpse, the dead body is meat gone bad. So there's this cannibalistic quality about memory which is being projected over here. So this cannibalism in the thought processes is something which is being talked about, but it becomes something more relevant and something more important, as we'll see in a moment. A corpse's meat gone bad. Well, and what's cheese? Corpse and milk. So again, cheese is something which is seen as a marker of nourishment and delicacy and taste and human consumption, is again connected with rottenness. So rottenness is very much an embedded condition in most human interaction, most human consumption. That's something which is being projected over here. Right? So a corpse, a dead body, is meat gone bad. Cheese is corpse and milk, is milk gone bad, etc. I read in the Voyages in China that the Chinese say a white man smells like a corpse. Cremation better, priests are dead against it, deviling for the other firm, wholesale burners, the Dutch elven dealers, time of the plague. So again, the whole idea of cremation becomes interesting, because we have on the other hand the priests are against it, the Catholic priests are against cremation. They obviously they advocate burial, and then suddenly we cut into this whole idea, the whole commerce behind cremation. The Dutch oven dealers, wholesale burners and Dutch oven dealers. Time of the plague, Quicklime fever pits to eat them, lethal chamber, ashes to ashes, or bury at sea. Where is the posse tower of silence? Eaten by birds, earth, fire, water. So we have different kinds of images of mortality over here, images of deadness over here, and reference to the Parsi tradition or the Zoroastrian tradition of keeping the dead bodies at a tower where birds come and peck at them. That is also being referred to over here. So we have different kinds of almost carnivalesque description about deadness, about dead bodies, which has obviously been done in a way to talk about mortality in a pseudo-comic and pseudo-philosophical way. Right. Eaten by birds, earth, fire, water. Drowning, they say, is the pleasantest. See your whole life in a flash. But being brought back to life, no. Can't bury in the air, however, out of a flying machine. Wonder does the news go about whenever a fresh one is let down. Underground communication. We learn that from them. Wouldn't be surprised. Regular square feet for them. Flies come before he's well dead. Got wind of Dignam. They wouldn't care about the smell of it. Salt white crumbling mush of corpse. Smell tastes like raw white turnips. So again, I mean, look at the constant mingling of the edible and the inedible, between the positive and the negative, between the pleasant and the unpleasant, and mortality and immortality have been talked about in very flippant terms across the stream of consciousness, random thoughts, processes associating one with each other. The whole idea of dying and then wind, the whole idea of being eaten by birds, the whole idea of the crumbling mush of corpse, which is also smelling, it has a salt white appearance, etc. And it tastes like raw white turnips. So a corpse tastes like raw white turnips. The gates glimmered in front, still open, back to the world again. So back to the world again obviously becomes the message of liminality, right? So the whole idea of shifting between the reverie world and the real world is something which happens across the novel Ulysses. So that's something which we must never lose sight of. The whole the transitions between the lived world, the experienced world, and the imagined world, the reverie world, the dream world. Okay. Back to the world again. Enough of this place. Bring you a bit nearer every time. Last time I was here was Mr. Cynico's funeral. Poor Papa too, the love that kills, and even scrapping of the earth at night with a lantern, like that case I read of two gravestones. Give you the creeps after a bit. I will appear to you after death. You will see my ghost after death. My ghost will haunt you after death. There's another world after death named hell. I don't like the other world, she wrote. No more do I. Plenty to see and hear and feel yet. Feel live, feel live warm beings near you. Let them sleep in their maggoty beds. They're not going to get me in this innings. Warm beds, warm, full-blooded life. So the whole passage over here becomes an affirmation and a demand to occupy life, to inhabit life, to experience life, and to get away from any metaphysical understanding post-life. So the whole idea of post-life, what happens after life, do you go to hell, etc. Those thoughts are being sidelined in favor of the immediate reality, the immediate lived reality, which is the embodied reality, the reality available to us through our senses, through our embodied engagements, through our affective engagements in the world around. And that affective embodied quality is something which is constantly foregrounded, and hence a very sensuous quality about the narrative, which was also a shock given the time in which it's written. Okay. Martin Cunningham emerged from a side path talking gravely. Solicitor, I think, I know his face. Menton, John Henry, solicitor, commissioner for oaths and affidavits. Dignam used to be in this office. Matt Dillon's long ago. Jolly Matt, convivial evenings, cool fowl, cigars, Tantalus glasses, heart of gold really. Yes, Menton got his rag out in the evening, or the bowling green, because I sailed inside him. Pure fluke in mine, the bias, why I took such a roasted dislike to me, hate at first sight. Molly and Floyd Dillon linked under the lily tree, laughing. Fellow always like that, mortified if women are by. Okay, got a dinge in the side of his hat, carriage properly. Excuse me, sir, Mr. Bloom said beside him. They stopped. Your hat is a little crushed, Mr. Bloom is pointing. John Henry Menton stared at him for an instant without moving. There, Martin Cunningham held, pointing also. John Henry Menton took off his hat, bulged out a dinge, and smoothed the nap with care on his coat sleeve. He clapped the hat on his head again. It's all right now, Martin Cunningham said. John Henry Menton jerked his head down in acknowledgement. Thank you, he said shortly. They walked on towards the gates. Mr. Bloom, chapfallen, drew behind a few paces so as not to overhear. Martin laying down the low. Martin could wind a sappy head like that round his little finger without us seeing it. Oyster eyes, never mind. Be sorry after perhaps when it dawns on him. Get the pull over him that way. Thank you, how grand we are this morning. So the entire conversation over here again looks look at the transitions that have been made over here between the banal, someone having a crushed hat, to the profound and political and metaphysical in quality, which is these borderlands are very, very blurry throughout Ulysses. Okay, and now we come to this point where the entire image of Ireland comes up in a very interesting and political way. And we get to see Bloom's ignorance about the country, the fact that it's never really seen the country except of Dublin. And this is what is on your screen at the moment. Strange, I never saw its real country, Ireland, my country, member for College Green. A boom that worker tact for all it was worth. It's the ads and side features sell a weekly, not a stale news in the official gazette. Queen Anne is dead, published with authority in the year 1000, and Jamestown situate in the townland of Rosenellis, barony of Tinahenge. To all whom it may concern, schedule pursuant to statute showing return of numbers of meals and jennets exported from Ballina. Nature notes, cartoons, Phil Blake's weekly part in Bull Story, Uncle Toby's page for Tiny Tots, Country Bumpkins queries. Dear Mr. Editor, what is a good cure for flatulence? I'd like that part, learn a lot, teaching others. The personal note, MAP, playing mainly old pictures, shapely brothers on Golden Strand, world's biggest balloon, double marriage of sisters celebrated, two bridegrooms laughing heartily at each other, Cooper in a room, printer, more Irish than the Irish. So you have a series of different kind of random images over here, which are obviously different kinds of advertisements in newspapers. And the whole idea of advertisement, the fact that Bloom is so close to the advertisement industry in Dublin, is quite symbolic, because the whole idea of advertisement is to disseminate science. That's the whole purpose of advertisements, to stylize science, to disseminate science, to control science, S-I-G-N-S, science. So the science system is being stylized through advertisements, and the whole idea of being an insider to the advertisement makes it's like a hyperlink text, because an entire novel Ulysses can be seen as an advertisement for different kinds of thought processes, right? So the fact that Bloom is an ad man, or very close to the ad industry, is striking, because that obviously makes them someone who's controlling narratives, someone who is in charge of controlling narratives, someone who is obviously aware of the control narratives the advertisement industry wields. Okay. The machines clanked in 3-4 times, thump, thump, thump. Now if you got paralyzed there and no one knew how to stop them, they clank on and the same, printed over and over, up and back, monkey doodle, the whole thing, want a cool head, right? So again, the whole idea, the automatism of printing is celebrated away, the automatism of production is celebrated away, yeah. And that's how the entire advertisement industry works. So everything is been printed and disseminated and spectacularly dished out. Well, get it into the evening edition, Councillor, Hines said. Soon be calling him my Lord Mayor. Long John is backing him, they say. The filmman, without answering, scribbled press on a corner of the street and made a sign to the typesetter. He handed the sheet silently over the dirty glass screen. Right, thanks, Hines said, moving off. Mr. Bloom stood on his way. If you want to draw, the cashier is just going to lunch, he said, pointing backward with his thumb. Did you? Hines asked. Mr. Bloom said, look sharp and you'll catch him. Thanks, old man, Hines said, and I'll tap him too. He hurried on eagerly towards the Freeman's Journal. Tree Barber lent him in Megas, 3 weeks, third hint. So, you can find that in Ulysses, there's a lot of money lending which takes place, and that's obviously very symbolic in quality. People owe each other different kinds of, gratitudes, different kinds of helps. And this non-repayment of money is obviously quite symbolic in Ulysses, because it's part of the gaps in Ulysses, the gaps in communication, the crisis in communication, the gaps in positions, the gaps in human relationships. That's obviously being conveyed to us very symbolically to this flow of money which is not never returned. So we have Buck Milligan, who owes money from Stephen Dedalus. Dedalus owes money from Buck Milligan. The milkwoman owes money from everyone, and over here Bloom and Hines, there's a lack of lending of money and the non-return of money here as well, and that's obviously quite symbolic in quality. That obviously makes it, the entire subtext of crisis of communication, even more poignant in quality. Okay, now we have this image of Bloom going out on the streets and walking through Dublin, which obviously becomes very cinematic in quality. We talked about the relationship in modernism and cinema already quite often, and the person that I recommend that you should read is someone called David Trotter. It's got a book called Modernism and Cinema, published by Blackwell. It's a really interesting book and very helpful as well. Now here we have Bloom passing out and walking down the streets of Dublin. Mr. Bloom passed out of the clanking noises through the gallery onto the landings. Now I'm going to tram it out all the way and then catch him out perhaps. Better, phone him up first. Number, yes, same as Citron's house, 28 00. Once more than so. Only once more than so. Once more that so. He went down the house staircase. Who the deuce crawl all over these walls with matches? Looks as if they did it for a bet. Heavy greasy smell there always is in his works. Lukewarm glue and thumbs next door when I was there. So again, the sense becomes important over here. The entire olfactory expressions, olfactory experiences become important because that obviously helps him navigate through his surroundings. He took out his handkerchief to dab his nose. Citron lemon, the soap I put there, lose it out of the pocket, putting back his handkerchief. He took out his soap and stored it away, buttoned in the hip pocket of his trousers. Now obviously the soap metaphor becomes useful because obviously that's a cleansing metaphor, something which is used to clean things, and obviously that becomes an inadequate form of cleaning because Dublin is so dirty and so gritty and so unclean. So the soap becomes a metaphor of the attempt to clean Dublin, the attempt to be hygienic, which obviously belies the spectacular lack of hygiene that people have in Dublin, which is being dramatized over here by Joyce. Okay, so what perfume does your wife use? I could go home still, tram, something I forgot just to say before dressing. No, here, no. A sudden screech of laughter came from the Evening Telegraph office. Know who that is? What's up? Pop in a minute to phone. Ned Lambert it is. He entered softly. Erin, green gem of the silver sea. The Coast Walks, Professor, McCall murmured softly, biscuitfully to the dusty window pane. Mr. Dedalis, staring from the empty fireplace at Ned Lambert's quizzing face, asked of it sourly. Agonizing Christ, wouldn't it give you a heartburn on your ass? Ned Lambert, seated on the table, read on. Oh, again, note the meanderings of some purling rill as it babbles in the way, though quarrelling with the stony obstacles, to the tumbling waters of Neptune's blue domain, amid mossy banks, fanned by gentlest zephyrs, played on by the glorious sunlight, or net the shadows cast over his pensive bosom by the overarching leafage of the giants of the forest. What about that, Simon? He asked over the fringe of his newspaper. How's that for high? Now again, look at the way in which language is used in Ulysses. So language over here is never an innocent performance. It isn't performance in first place. It's very performative. It's not really a passive category. It's a performative category. Now also language is used to correspond to certain emotional registers, emotional intellectual registers. So certain kind of languages are used deliberately, stylized systems of signification to convey certain emotions. And that's why, again, I go back to my previous point, the advertising agency becomes a very symbolic presence in Ulysses. Because the entire culture, the entire business of advertisement is a controlled science. The science system has been controlled, stylized, navigated, played with. And the playfulness of science is something which advertisements have historically always done in stylizing certain things, and that becomes very much part of the main narrative, the nested narrative of Ulysses as well. Okay, and then of course the whole relationship of drinking and language is mentioned in some details. Okay, and then consumption, the whole act of consumption comes back. He ate off the crescent, this is Professor McHugh, he ate off the crescent of water biscuit he had been nibbling, and hungered, made ready to nibble the biscuit in his other hand. Highfalutin stuff. Bludderbags. Ned Lambert is taking a day off, rather upsets a man's day, a funeral does. He has influence, they say. Old Chatterton, the Vice-Chancellor, is his granduncle, or his great-granduncle, close to 90, they say. Sub-leader of his death, written this long time perhaps, living to spite them, might go first himself. Johnny, make room for your uncle. The Right Honourable Hedges I. Chatterton. Dare say he writes him an odd shaky cheque or two on gale days. Windfall when he kicks out. Alleluia. So again, human relationships are very mercenary in Ulysses, as you can see. So the whole idea of this very influential great-granduncle is being parodied over here, and there's a wait for a windfall to happen when he kicks out, when he passes out, so he passes away. Right, so there's a spectral quality about money, there's a spectral quality about human beings in Ulysses, also human relationships, something shadowy, spectral, and not quite solid. And the lack of tangible quality, the intangibility, as it were, the intangible quality of human relationships in Ulysses is something which is foregrounded over and over again. The entire city becomes a city of spectrality, the entire city becomes a city of unreal human relationships. And if you can see, if you make a comparison with this image from Eliot's Wasteland, who talks about unreal city and the brown fog of a winter town, something similar happens in Dublin as well. It's very unhygienic way, it's very dirty way, it's full of gritty realism, and human relationships are always stylized and very, very spectral in quality, and they're very ungenuine in quality. Right, and that becomes part of the crisis in Dublin. The cultural crisis, the communication crisis, is very much a part of the system. This crisis of communication, that is the main crisis at play. Okay, and now we have again the human beings' navigation through machines and movements and sounds which are mechanical in quality, and again the organic-inorganic combination is something which Joyce is playing up very, very subtly and complexly. And this should be on the screen. The bell whirred again as it rang off. He came in quickly and bumped against Lenihan, who was struggling up with a second tissue. "Pardon, Monsieur," Lenihan said, clutching him for an instant and making a grimace. "My fault," Mr. Bloom said, suffering his grip. "Are you hurt? I'm in a hurry." "Knee," Lenihan said. He made a comic face and whined, rubbing his knee. "The accumulation of the Anno Domini." "Sorry, Mr. Bloom," Mr. Bloom said. So again, look at the way in which Anno Domini, or after Christ, or the pain of Christ, is being used in a very flippant way over here. The accumulation of the Anno Domini is obviously the reference to suffering, and that happens when two people run into each other and one of them hurts the other person's knee. Something so minor and trivial has been described in very metaphysical terms. He went to the door and, holding it ajar post, J.J. O'Malley slapped the heavy pages over. The noise of two shrill voices, a mouth organ, echoed in the bare hallway from the newsboys squatted on the doorsteps. "We are the boys from Wexford who fought with heart and hand. Exit Bloom." "I'm just running around to Bachelor's Walk," Mr. Bloom said, about this ad of case. "Want to fix it up. They tell me he's around here and Dillon's." Now if you take a look at this bit, "exit Bloom," this is normally used in theatre productions when it's been told to us that someone exits the scene, someone who goes away from the scene, etc. Now obviously the "exit Bloom" away is something which Bloom tells himself in his head, and that becomes a very interesting symbol, because obviously, as you've seen in many occasions, there's a constant conversation that Bloom is having in his head, or Daedalus is having in his head, which may or may not be aligned to the conversations around him. So we have two different kinds of combinations or conversations. One is the embedded conversation that characters have in their heads, and the other, of course, is the extended conversations they have with other people, other human subjects around them. And it's constant commingling, as it were, between the embedded order of conversation and the extended order of conversation is something which Ulysses does very, very often. So there are different focal points in the novel, which makes it such a cognitively complex novel to grasp it, because there isn't a single focal point through which the entire story unfolds. So there are multiple focal points. Even the same character can have different focal points, which makes it very difficult for us to cognitively grapple with what is happening in Ulysses. Okay, right. He looked indecisively for a moment at their faces. The editor, who, leaning against the mantel shelf, had propped his head on his hand, suddenly stretched forth an arm amply. "Begone," he said. "The world is before you." "Back in no time," Mr. Bloom said, hurrying out. J.J. O'Malley took the tissues from Lenihan's hand and read them, blowing them apart gently without comment. "He'll get an advertisement," the professor said, staring through his black-rimmed spectacles over the cross-blind. "Look at the young scamps after him." "Sure, where?" Lenihan cried, running to the window. "A street cottage." Both smiled over the cross-blind and the file of capering newsboys in Mr. Bloom's wake, the last zigzagging white on the breeze of mocking kite, a tail of white burnouts. "Look at the young guttersnap behind him, hue and cry," Lenihan said, "and you'll kick, oh my rib risable," taking off his flat spokes and the walk. Small lions steal upon larks." He began to mazurka in swift caricature towards the flow on sliding feet past the fireplace, and J.J. O'Malley, who placed his tissues in his receiving hands. "What's that?" Miles Crawford said with a start. "Where are the other two gone?" "Who?" the professor said, turning. "They've gone round to the Oval for a drink. Perhaps Hooper is there with Jack Hall. Came over last night." "Come on then," Miles Crawford said. "Where's my hat?" He walked jerkily into the office behind, patting the vent of his jacket, jingling his keys in his back pocket, the jingle then in the air and against the wood as he locked his desk dryer. So you can look at the movements over here, and there are very casual conversations of going to a pub and getting drunk, and then of course the human movements happening together, but also look at the way in which different micro sounds and micro movements take place, the jingle of a key inside a pocket. And it's very intensification of something very minor and micro is something which is done over and over again in Ulysses, which gives a sense of magnification of small things, which is quite cinematic in quality in its own way. Okay, now it is a very interesting conversation, and I'll end with this point today. It's a very interesting conversation about the nature and function and the death of civilizations, which is something which we saw already in Heart of Darkness, when obviously Marlowe comes back and talks about how this place in London and River Thames was once too a dark place in the world, and now he's been to Congo, which is like prehistoric London to a certain extent. So the whole entire idea of civilization in modernism is a very complex thing. It is definitely something which is transitional in quality, something which is mutable in quality, and the acceptance of the mutability of civilization is something which is painful as well as liberating on certain occasions. Now, the reference to Roman civilization is brought up over here. Imperium Romanum, J.J. O'Malley said gently, it sounded nobler than British or Brixton. The word reminds of somehow of fat in the fire. Miles Crawford blew his first puff violently towards the ceiling. That's it, he said. We are the fat. You and I are the fat in the fire. We haven't got a chance of a snowball in hell. The grandeur that was Rome. Wait a moment, Professor McHugh said, raising to quiet close. We mustn't be led away by words, by sounds of words. We think of Rome imperial, imperious, imperative. He extended elocutionary arms from frayed, strained shirt cuffs, posing. What was a civilization? Vast, loud, but vile. Cloquet, serious, Jews in the wilderness and on the mountaintop said, it is meet to be here. Let us build an altar to Jehovah. The Roman, like the Englishman who follows in his footsteps, brought to every new shore on which he set his foot. On our shore he never set it, only his cloacal obsession. He gazed about him in his toga and said, it is meet to be here. Let us construct a water closet. Now, obviously this is a parody of English imperialism, but it's interesting how the English imperialism is seen as a legacy, as a continuation of the Roman imperialism, how both became this white man's imperial narratives, and that's something which is highlighted here. Which they accordingly did so, Lenihan said. Our old ancestral or ancient ancestors, as we read in the first chapter of Genesis, were partial to the running stream. They were nature's gentlemen, J.J. O'Malley murmured, but we have also Roman law. And Pontius Pilate is a prophet, Professor McHugh responded. Do you know the story that Chief Baron Palace, J.J. O'Malley asked? It was at a Royal University dinner. Everything was going swimmingly. First, my riddle, Lenihan said. Are you ready? Mr. Omadan Burke, tall in a copious grey of Donegal tweed, came in from the hallway. Stephen de Dallas behind him, uncovered as he entered. And then, of course, they asked to come in. The friends come in. Is being summoned by Lenihan. I escort a suppliant, Mr. O'Madden Burke said melodiously. Youth led by experience visits notoriety. How do you do? The editor said, holding out a hand. Come in, your governor is just gone. Lenihan said to all, silence, what opera resemblance a railway line? Reflect, ponder, excogate, reply. Stephen handed over the type sheets, pointing to the style and signature. Who? The editor asked. Bit torn off. Mr. Garrett Deasy, Stephen said. That old pelter, the editor said. Who tore it? Was the shot taken? Again, the reference to Garrett Deasy is interesting because he's the one who has a conversation with Stephen about this Jewishness and how Jewishness is obviously a mark of corruption and degeneration. If you remember one of your earlier lectures in Ulysses, how that extensively. And obviously he sent someone to be published to the editor. True, Stephen. Okay, hey, good day, Stephen, the professor said, coming to peer over the shoulders. Foot and mouth, are you turned? Bullock befriending Bard. Shindy in well-known restaurant. Good day, sir, Stephen answered, blushing. The letter is not mine, but Mr. Garrett asked me to. Oh, I know him, Garrett Deasy, I know him, Miles Crawford said, and I knew his wife too, the bloodiest old Tartar God ever made. By Jesus, she had a foot-and-mouth disease, and no mistake. The night she threw the soup in the waiter's face and the star and got her home. A woman brought sin into the world. For Helen, the runaway wife of Menelaus, 10 years of Greece, or Ruki, Prince of Britannia. Is he a widower? Stephen asks. Aye, a grass one, Miles Crawford said, his eye running down the typescript. Emperor's houses, Habsburg, an Irishman saved his life on ramparts of Vienna. Don't you forget, Maximilian Karl O'Donnell, Graf von Tyrconnell in Ireland, sent his heir over to make the king an Austrian field marshal now. Going to be trouble there one day. Wild geese. Oh yes, every time, don't you forget that. The moot point is that he forgot it. J.J. O'Malley said quietly, turning a horseshoe paperweight. Saving princes is a thank you job. Professor McHugh turned on him, and if not, he said, I'll tell you how it is. Miles Crawford began. A Hungarian it was one day. And then there are different kinds of quotations done about different historical moments. Now what we see over here, the entire conversation, the reason why I'm reading out these things in some details, is a half-chopped quality of the conversations. And none of these together, none of these individually make any sense, but they all come together as half-chopped conversations, and they all become some kind of advertisement rhetoric where the catchy words are being said to us, the decisive words are being said to us, and the catchiness of phrases is something which is being projected over and over again by the different people, the different voices who speak together over here. Which brings us to the original point that we talked about, that Ulysses being a very heteroglossic and polyphonic novel. There's so many different kinds of voices, spectral voices, dead voices, human voices, voices from the past, voices from the present, voices looking forward to the future, and of course a gramophone, the sound recorder, the machine to record sounds, become a very important metaphor of this voiced, the hyper voice quality about Ulysses. Everything can be recorded in gramophone, which can then churn out its voices over and over again. So I'll stop at this point today, but I think the heteroglossia and the polyphony of Ulysses, and also the carnivalesque quality of Ulysses, where different kinds of things such as death, mortality, profundity, mysticism, epiphany, they're all talked about in very machinic, almost flippant terms, which give a dark comic quality to this novel, is something which we must pay some attention to as we move on. So from this point onwards, we'll look at certain very selected passages in Ulysses, and we'll wind up in maybe a couple of more lectures, or maybe 3 more lectures in the times to come. So I'll stop at this point today. I'll continue with this in the next lecture. Thank you for your attention.